Agenda item 1, the minutes. Now, they have been circulated.
Mr. Mayor, point of order, please.
Councillor Tyndall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Under part 2, under part 4 of the Constitution, 17.1, the minutes, it says the minutes are printed, the minutes as printed are not the minutes prepared to encompass points revised and by Councillor Foster. It's also believed that other pertinent points have been omitted and the minutes have been shortened somewhat. It's also been omitted. Therefore, I request that the minutes as printed are set aside until the recording of the council meeting can be used to ensure their accuracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tyndall. Well, I believe that the minutes have been fully recorded as per the live recording, almost word for word, so I cannot quite understand what the difference is. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yes, unfortunately, Councillor Foster is not present tonight because she's not well, but she did, in her question, she did raise a number of points and the minutes do not fully cover that. Unfortunately, I do not have the complete wording with me, as unfortunately, Councillor Foster isn't here tonight. I believe also 2 interventions of mine were not recorded, but I have not checked them myself.
Well, I think that, you know, without sort of presenting any absolute hard fact on this, I'm afraid I'm going to have to accept the minutes as they were recorded.
If Mr. Mayor, that's all that we're asking, that the minutes are checked against the recording.
Thank you. Councillor Tyndall, the minutes have been checked against the actual recording, so we must accept them as they are. Now, I'm therefore minded to recommend approval of the minutes. Is that agreed? Thank you. I'll sign those later.
May I ask that our votes on Liberal Democrats are recorded against, please?
Sorry?
That the votes of Liberal Democrats are recorded against the approval of the minutes.
Okay. Right. Thank you, Councillor Tyndall. Well, we will record electronically, please, the votes for and against. So if you could all do that, please. Fine. Is everybody connected? Can we record our votes then, please? Which is which on here then? Yeah, but how do you? I don't think it's working. Just press the green. Press the green. I've done that. Oh, okay. Right, thank
you. I'm doing the right thing, but it's not working.
18. Looking at the numbers, we've only got 19 at the moment and still a few more.
So you went against, did you?
I did.
Just checking before I move it. I'll put it back, don't worry.
I didn't actually see anything change when I did it.
Everybody?
It should come up in a minute. What I'll do is I'll double check it name by name anyway. Make sure you're definitely against.
Okay.
Because we get. Oh, did you do it on there as well? Yeah.
I don't
If you
know.
take that one off, and then
I
I'll
don't know.
personally record yours down
Yeah.
as against. Once this is all done, it comes up name by name, so we'll see against the name.
That's fine.
Don't worry.
Is that everybody now? I think so. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. I think everybody's cast their votes now, and the minutes are agreed. Thank you.
17 of them, and there's only 13 votes.
No. There should be more now. Moving on to agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest to declare? No? Fine, thank you very much. Then we go on to agenda item 3, public participation. There is none. Agenda item 4, announcements. Now, the first one is by myself, and this is we want to record 1 minute's silence in remembrance of Honorary Freeman Bob Parsons OBE, who was a member of this council many, many years ago. Now, I believe that Councillor Chapman would like to say a few words. Thank you, Councillor Chapman.
That's correct. Yes, basically, for those that didn't know Bob Parsons, he served this area and all the different parts of the world with great expertise. He gave a lot of his life, him and his wife, Anne, and basically he died on the 29th of March, and I visited his funeral at West Harts Crematorium, and it was a sad time, but I'm pleased to see that a lot of the people turned up to pay homage to him. So basically, if I just give a quick report what this man did, and hopefully you appreciate it. In 1982 to 1984, he worked for Save the Children, did a lot of hard work there, especially in Sri Lanka. And basically, in 1989, he was given an MBE. Well worth it, well earned. And in 1994, he founded Hope for Children. And that is a local charity that works with the people of this area and also the people in Africa. They go across there and they help the small villages with the children, the education and all that. And obviously it is going very well. And I knew Bob beforehand, but in 2000, when I was the mayor of Dacorum, it was my chosen charity. And we worked very well together, travelled a lot, earned quite good cash to pay for the things that they wanted and help the people. So that's where I came on the scene, mainly with Bob. And also, basically in 2006, he was made a freeman of the Borough of Dacorum, which was very well earned. And 2014, he received an OBE. And every bit of this, Anne and Bob gave their life to helping people across the world and our area as well. And I just feel it was a sad time when I visited at the crematorium, but the thing was, it was the memories were great, and what he's left behind will be of value to so many people. So I just think what he's done is worthwhile just saying a big thank you to him and Anne, and hopefully that's it. That's all I want to say, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Does anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Tindall, please.
Although I did not know the councillor, I think his record as read out by Burke speaks for itself. And I think every person who has served this council should be honoured. And I would join our group with the sentiments expressed.
Thank you, Councillor Tindall. So would everybody please join me in holding 1 minute's silence, please? Thank you, everyone. Can we continue? We're still under announcements. Any announcements by the Chief Executive, please? No, thank you. Announcements by the group leaders? Anything?
Thank you,
Councillor
Mr. Mayor.
Williams.
On behalf of my group, I'd like to tender apologies on behalf of Councillor Adeleke, Arslan, Griffiths, Timmis, Doris, Whitelow, Hearn and Rogers, and can also tender apologies on behalf of Councillor Madden.
Thank you. We now move on
Mr.
to
Mayor,
item
if I
4.4. I beg
Sorry,
sorry,
sorry.
Councillor Tindall. Sorry.
Mr Mayor, could I tender apologies on behalf of Councillor Ransley, Hollinghurst, Allen, Pringle, Barry, Diana and Foster, and also same time inform everybody that mother and baby are doing well and Sammy hopes to join us next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tindall. Can we now please move on to item 4.4, and that's the report from the portfolio holders. Councillor Williams, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of updates from me as leader. Firstly, to say, not directly related to the motion that we agreed at the last full council regarding our concerns about possible expansion of Luton Airport, but I'm pleased to see the direction of travel, without being a pun, that the previous application, which was under consideration, has been called in by the Secretary of State and penciled in for a public inquiry in September and penciled in 10 weeks. I do hope this is a sign that the Secretary of State will take great interest in their future expansion plans and similarly call them in for scrutiny rather than leaving to Luton Borough Council to determine their own outcome. On a slightly separate note, whilst I'm not thinking this is a fresh start, I'm pleased to see that in the latest notice from the West Herts Hospital Trust that they've indicated for their board meeting on the 20th of June that given some of the change in circumstances since they last considered the option, they will take a fresh look at what may have changed since their last consideration at the option of a new build site as opposed to the redevelopment of Watford. Now, I don't think that's something we ought to be celebrating yet, but I think it's the only chink in the armour so far that they are prepared to at least reconsider the option of a greenfield site, which is, members will know, is the view of this council that that is a far greater and better option for future healthcare provision, hospital provision, that for our residents than the redevelopment of a rather cramped site at Watford, producing what we consider to be a less than satisfactory long-term hospital solution for West Hertfordshire. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Any questions for Councillor Williams? Councillor Tindall, please.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, I'm pleased to hear the news about the hospital, Luton Airport and about the hospital. I just wonder on the question of hospital, has there been any mention of the potential future of the urgent care centre and the NHS site in just off Marlows, which if various other plans go to it, could actually be very useful to the council?
No, Mr. Mayor. Discussions are always ongoing with the NHS about the options, but I think what is quite clear for the future of Hemel Hempstead and to a degree St Albans is the decision over Watford or a greenfield site, and then the future of Hemel Hempstead and St Albans and the provision on those two sites, I think, will fall in place. What has always been clear is, under the current plans, that a massive proportion of the investment or funding available is going to go to Watford, and Hemel and St Albans will pick up the crumbs. I'm also very clear that whilst there are discussions around alternative uses of the site at Hemel, the maximum benefit we can get is to use as much of the site for healthcare as possible to bring the biggest range of services to our local residents. So while the option is still on the table, I would like the NHS to provide the biggest range of services at Hemel. Once they've made a decision and we know what that's going to be, then alternative uses for the site, of course, can be looked at. But in my view, at least, the provision of healthcare for our residents should be the first priority and first use on the site.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Thank you. Now that should conclude everything for Councillor Williams. Can we now move on to Councillor Elliott, please?
Good evening, Mr Mayor. I'd like to give my portfolio holder report on finance and resources. The Finance Service has been extremely busy during March, supporting the payment of the final COVID business and self-isolation support grants. The Finance Service are focused on the Council's financial year end, ahead of publishing the draft accounts for 21-22. The Finance Service also continues to work closely with our external commercial experts to develop the basis of the Council's future commercial strategy and commercial business case appraisals. Now, the performance of the commercial assets has remained strong and income levels exceed budgeted figures, and occupancy remains above 95%. This remains a good indicator of how the local small independent businesses have progressed over the course of the pandemic. The government's moratorium on debt collection came to an end on the 25th of March, and the implications of the COVID Act, which replaces it, is being reviewed. It is still unknown at this point in time what impact that will have upon the local business community and void levels. Going forward, the customer and business response to COVID recovery will be key to income performance. The estates team has successfully surrendered an agricultural lease at Bunkers Park. The land has been transferred to Clean, Safe and Green for open space, carbon offsetting and environmental repurposing. The building services team contract for phase 1 replacement of Rossgate shopping precinct is progressing. The scaffolding is now erected and the window replacement has started. And lastly, but not least, on the Revenue and Benefits Service, the teams have again successfully carried out significant tasks of updating benefit awards for the new financial year and issuing council tax and business rates bills for the 71,000 accounts within the borough. The self-isolation support grant scheme has now closed. The team has awarded over 1,700 grants of £500 to residents with low income during the period it was running. The current main focus of the teams is in administration of the government's £150 energy bills rebate to residents who live in properties from band A to D. They are working with colleagues in finance and with the software provider and expect to make payments to around 20,000 households who pay by direct debit during the last week of April. They will also then be writing to roughly 15,000 other households to collect and verify their bank account details and aim to make the majority of those payments during May. That ends my report and I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. Questions for Councillor Elliott? Councillor Burney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Despite government support during the pandemic, many businesses appear to be in difficulty still. Does the portfolio holder have a view on the extent to which reported staff shortages and the increase in inflation will impact on local businesses?
Thank you, Councillor Burnley. It's a macro and microeconomic situation at the moment. Clearly, staff shortages, especially in the hospitality sector, due to furlough and the lockdown, a lot of staff from the hospitality sector moved into other areas and haven't come back, primarily probably due to, the low wages that they received in that area at the time. Also, the case of unsocial hours, so people have moved to other jobs. So there are issues locally with hospitality. You've also have the well-publicised situation with the supply chain, with the inflation in lorry drivers' wages, but that seems to have levelled off and the panic has gone in that. Although supply chain with the food coming in, etc., from abroad, clearly that causes inflation and evidently the cost of fuel, etc. We've just seen today that inflation has gone to 7%, and actually diesel has gone up 33% in the past year. So the transport costs have increased. But we're seeing that worldwide. American inflation was announced today at just over 8%, and that's the highest inflation rate for 40 years. 7% is for 30 years for the UK, so it's a worldwide issue. Clearly, costs are increasing, inflation's increasing, and that is just creating the perfect storm. We all remember, well, I remember the 70s when they had to do price controls, and you were limited to £4 of sugar in the co-op because you couldn't get any more, you know. So I'm afraid it's a worldwide phenomenon. We're trying our best as a council to help our commercial clients if they get into trouble, payment plans, being very sympathetic to the issues that they have. But yes, clearly the current situation with the inflation and staff shortage will affect, because if there's staff shortages, wages will go up, and that will create an inflationary pressure on the business, and clearly that will come to the price point that we all know. So hopefully that gives you an idea, but it's very difficult to judge. We're in unprecedented terms for the first time in about 30 years. Really. Okay.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up question, Councillor? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's very interesting, Councillor Elliott. I was wondering whether the mix of the businesses in Hemel give you any cause for concern in relation to these two factors, staff shortages and inflation. Clearly, this is a countrywide problem, but I was wondering whether the types of businesses are skewed in such a way that it exacerbates the problem, particularly in Hemel, or not. I mean Dacorum rather than Hemel, of course. Thank you.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's we do have a mixture of businesses, but we don't have any heavy engineering or real manufacturing. That's more the Midlands and further up. So a lot of it is really down to staff. I would say wages down here. And again, landlords, commercial landlords have now had a reality check. So they're being a lot more sympathetic to businesses, especially when they would rather have a building filled than empty, and incurring business rates, etc. So there's probably a bit of given on the landlord side. Clearly staff wages, input costs, supply chain again, fuel, and evidently food, etc. coming from abroad, or even with Ukraine, we can see that we're all a bit surprised that a third of the world's grain supplies come from the Ukraine. So that impacts on us. And my view, personal view, is I think we're heading for a recession if Mr. Putin doesn't disappear into ether very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. Any further questions for Councillor Elliott?
Does the portfolio holder think that Chancellor Rishi Sunak still has more important things to think about than inflation?
Well, he has clearly. Remember the last question from the last time when you asked me that. I think about 7 hours later, Putin invaded Ukraine, so I was probably right. We are, I said, an unprecedented situation, and the Ukrainian situation has exacerbated what is happening. It's a global phenomenon, inflation. Governments at this time have only a limited armoury to fight inflation. If you take the globalisation that we've had, the deindustrialisation of the West as we've moved everything to China, the supply chain that comes in that way, it's very difficult. So there are limited missiles, I should say missiles, limited ammunition in his army to fight this. inflationary aspects that are coming through. And it's the only way is clearly you have the Bank of England, they're in charge of fighting inflation, which is an independent organisation from the Chancellor. So it's their job to fight inflation in this country. For that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. No further questions? Then we will move on to the next portfolio holder. Thank you. Now, the next portfolio holder is actually Councillor Griffiths, who's not present. So I believe Councillor Williams, are you going to be able to present for her, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And mercifully, the housing report is fairly short. You must be being kind to me. Just a few headlines from... oh, it's on. Oh, sorry. I was pointing at me, sorry. Right, just some headlines from the Housing Service. Supported tenants and leaseholder services. Supported housing staff report they have visited or had contact with, including referrals, 7,661 tenants. Promotion of block champions has led to an increase in resident volunteers, and the fire alarm upgrade is being completed at Elizabeth House. Strategic housing, proactively participating and supporting Hertfordshire County Council to plan for Ukrainian sponsorship and connection schemes, including the preparation for undertaking accommodation checks for those who volunteered to take in Ukrainian refugees. The fourth Afghan household has been resettled in line with the government's resettlement scheme. As members are aware, we said we were taking 4 families and we've now taken in the 4th family. We've engaged with legal services to obtain a warrant for an entry due to PRS regulatory breaches, and the development of a new domestic abuse residents and staff policy in line with the requirements outlined by the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance accreditation framework. Property in place, continuation of a high level of gas servicing for the period, and as members may be aware, there's continuing pressure on Osborne's contract in terms of labour shortages following pandemic and other pressures, and hence has resulted in a delay in work. But we are actively engaged with Osborne on a number of areas in which we can work with them to improve the service and bring things back into line with tenants' expectations. As is normal for Councillor Griffiths, I have a list here of current housing development schemes. I won't read them all out, Mr. Mayor, but I'll ask them to be appended to the minutes. Happy to take questions which I may or may not be able to answer, but if not, I'll pass them on.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Any questions on behalf of Councillor Griffiths? No? Oh, I beg your pardon. Sorry, Councillor Symington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I thought we were meant to use the button rather than wave, but I can do both. Thank you very much, Councillor Williams, for presenting Councillor Griffiths' report. I wanted to pick up, and I think you're aware of the question probably that I'm likely to ask about the Afghan refugees. I know that already the council has moved from offering 3 to 4 homes in Dacorum, and obviously I welcome that. I'm also aware that a 5th home has now become available and is being offered to Afghan refugees, with particular request obviously that this goes to one of the 85 that are currently housed in a local hotel and therefore are already living in the community. My understanding is that there is no cost to Dacorum Borough Council for doing this. This is not a property that is part of our in-housing register, and it is being brought forward by an organisation that was doing it with a charitable view, and will be bearing the cost in terms of the lower rent itself. So what I would like to ask is if you would give due consideration to welcoming a 5th family in our community as warmly as we are about to have a motion welcoming families from Ukraine into other people's homes, and also to expedite that happening as quickly as possible before the property is let elsewhere on a commercial basis, probably to somebody outside of the area.
Thank you, Councillor Symington. Councillor Williams?
I'm going to be cautious in my response, Mr. Mayor, because I am aware that there has been email correspondence between Councillor Symington and Councillor Griffiths on this subject, to most recently which I was copied into, but I haven't got the background. And I believe there has been discussion between the potential provider of the accommodation and the authority, and it's not as straightforward as it might otherwise seem. So I don't know enough of the detail to commit, but I'm aware discussions have taken place, and at some stage we've not yet been able to bring that to fruition. So I don't think it'd be appropriate for me, not having the knowledge that my colleagues have, to commit the authority if there may be challenges that can't be met.
Are we not using the callback system?
I will, I was just waiting to see if
Oh, right.
had a follow-up question.
Councillor Symington, thank you.
Yes. Sorry, I'm still struggling with this. Obviously, I can give you follow-up information, and that is that basically my understanding is that, as I said, there is no cost to the council in this. It is a question of working with the Refugee Council, which I believe that Decorum now is working with that and has joined the other councils in Hertfordshire to do so. And all I can ask is, on behalf of residents in my community for whom I'm representing, who would like to be able to welcome with open arms other refugees into our community and provide housing for them, that the council gives it full consideration and works as quickly as possible to come to provide an answer to that. Thank you.
Councillor Williams.
I don't think I can add anything further to my previous answer.
Fine, thank you. Any other question for Councillor Williams? Councillor Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If the council will indulge me, I'll just I do have a question, but I was just going to say on the last point, as one of the ward councillors for the property involved, I would like to echo support, and hopefully that the council will be able to view that favourably. No, I had a unrelated question, but again, it's to do with the Afghan resettlement. Just following up on a query from last council session. Would the leader be able to confirm of the 4 families permanently settling in the borough, were we able to bring those from the people that had been temporarily housed within the borough, or has there been a resettlement from families that were elsewhere in the country that have now moved to Decorum? We were obviously concerned about those families that had began settling roots, getting children settled, and obviously trying to get some stability in their lives, then having a permanent place outside of the communities that they'd started in.
Councillor Williams.
In short, I don't know whether the 4 families were from those who are already billeted in hotels in Decorum. The placement of families is coordinated by the Home Office, but I'd be happy to get the answer and provide a written response to members.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Any further questions for Councillor Williams? No, thank you. Can we move on to Councillor Williams now for corporate and contracted services, please?
Good. My last roll of the dice on this session, Mr. Mayor, hopefully. Just a couple of things to update members. Happy to take questions. Both of them relate to things I've reported previously. One is just to confirm that the High Barnes remedial work is more or less complete. In terms of the most important aspect, which is the filling of the void, that's been done successfully. There is just some remedial work around paving and tarmacking to be completed, which may have been done by now, but my report is a few days old. And on the second one is the members will be aware that we recently closed the consultation on the Berkhamsted Leisure Centre proposals. I'm pleased to say we've had over 700 responses to that. They are currently being assessed and gone through. They will be reported to members as part of the REBA 3 report, and I hope that will come to members over the summer cycle. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Any questions for Councillor Williams, please? Councillor Symington.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Williams, thank you. I'd like to ask if you have an update from last time on the progress that you're making with the EV electric vehicle charging point strategy, which I think has moved from hoping to work with one to now actually consulting with and taking soundings from a number of potential suppliers. And I wondered if you could update us on where that process has got to.
You must have been listening to my conversation with the Chief Executive this afternoon when I was updated on the progress. We have now, as I indicated previously, we have been working with a number of organisations to get their view on the options for Decorum. My understanding now is we've narrowed that down to one potential supplier, and we will work with them over the next few weeks, not over towards the summer, on identifying the sites and the range of charging options that will be provided. And I'm quite confident that we should be able to reach agreement with them and start a programme of rolling out enhanced charging facilities over the 22-23 council year.
Thank you. I welcome that we're moving forward on this. Thank you very much.
Any further questions for Councillor Williams? No? Thank you very much. Can we move on to Councillor Barrett, please, for Environmental Services? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the environmental projects, in conjunction with the Great British Spring Clean, we have supported 22 litter picks across the borough, with a further 9 litter picks in the diary. The close swap event held at the Forum was a great success, with 79 attendees bringing 676 items and taking away 556 items. The remaining clothes being stored for the next event or being distributed to local charities. We now have 628 registered street champions with 29 new registrations in March. Registered champions receive a newsletter on a quarterly basis, and any volunteers who have not collected equipment are emailed on a monthly basis. Our annual compost giveaway is scheduled for Sunday the 15th of May at the Cupid Green Depot between 8:30 and 11:30. Garden waste collections have commenced, and in respect of additional garden waste subscriptions, we have so far issued 1,146 stickers, with additional requests expected to continue throughout the summer. On Clean Safe Green, list clearance along the A41 took place at the end of March. Grass cutting has commenced, with first cuts being successfully completed across the borough. Maintenance works to the splash park have been completed on schedule, and I can confirm that the park will open on Friday the 15th of April. Parks and open spaces. We're supplying 60 new planted troughs to the Old Town, which will contribute to the ongoing improvement of this area. New wildflower areas have been created in Gadebridge Park at the Queensway entrance, and we're working with a local business in Kings Langley to create new wildflower areas which they will sponsor. And works at the Canal Fields play area are due to commence towards the end of April. Trees and woodlands. In respect of the storm damage resulting from Storm Eunice, we now have a total of 230 reported incidents, with work ongoing to clear the residue. Hedge planting has been completed in Bunkers Park to screen off the cemetery site from the rest of the park. And we've worked with Friends of Bunkers Park and the Friends of Chipperfield Common, supporting working days which have been well attended by residents. And we've now successfully planted all 96 standard trees that were scheduled for this year's season. And in respect of waste services, nothing specific to report here, other than to confirm that we're continuing to maintain our usual excellent service. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could the portfolio holder tell us how many of the 628 registered street champions have not collected their equipment?
Thank you. I don't actually have the current figure with me, and I should have been prepared for your question, but I'll get the figure for you tomorrow and send it through to you if that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Any further questions? Councillor Guest, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is Dacorum accessing funding through the County Council for tree planting under the Queen's Green Canopy scheme?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Guest. Yes, I'm pleased to confirm that we will be taking advantage of the generous grant funding that has been offered by Herts County Council. We will be planting a Aurora margin, no, I can't actually say this, pronounce this, Aurora margin artem tulip tree, forgive the pronunciation, which is a strong growing medium-sized deciduous tree with distinctive shaped leaves and tulip-shaped greenish flowers which appear in midsummer. The tree will be 5 to 6 metres in height and will be planted in the Queen Square during week commencing the 30th of May ahead of the Jubilee celebrations. The tree will be erected with a tree guard around it and a plaque as well. Thank
you. Any further questions? Councillor Symington, please, yes?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Oh, I've got lost. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Barrett. I wanted, in fact, I'm really glad you mentioned something that I've been asked to ask at this meeting, and that is about the Canal Fields play area. I understand that this has been, which I think you've now confirmed is going to commence at the end of April. I'm aware, and I've been asked to ask this question, that this has been ongoing for 2 years, and that actually it's been quite difficult for the clerk to Berkhamsted Town Council to get this information. So firstly, I'd like you to confirm that I have understood you correctly and the works for the new play area will start at the end of April. And secondly, I'd like to ask that this information could be communicated to the clerk of Berkhamsted Town Council so that he can make colleagues aware in that area who've been asking for this information. Thank you.
Yes, I can confirm that's what I said. So I've been reliably informed by officers that the issue will take place at the end of April, and certainly I'll make sure that the clerk is informed of that. And if there is any variation to that, I'll make sure that's communicated also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Claughton, please.
Yes, following on from that, could I just ask if the work is due to begin by the end of April, when it's due to be finished?
Again, I don't have that information, but certainly I shall find out and let you know. I'll give you a written reply.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. I can't see any further questions. Councillor Symington.
Thank you, very generous. I just actually wanted to follow up on some comments actually that you didn't refer to in your report, but that are in the minutes from the last meeting about the termination or renegotiation, I'll just say renegotiation of the tree management contract with Herts County Council. And I wondered if you could update us on where that's got to and whether Dacorum will be taking that on going forward. Thank you.
Negotiations are still ongoing, and yes, we are intending to continue with the contract.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. I think that concludes the portfolio holder's presentation. Yes, sorry. Can we move on to Councillor Banks, please? Community and Regulatory Services. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Turning first to regulatory services, a brief COVID-19 update for you. Case numbers remain high and are still an ongoing concern here in Dacorum. This is mainly due to the Omicron variant, which has become the dominant variant since December throughout the UK. This has continued to put pressure on the environmental health teams who are working exceptionally hard during this difficult time. Public space protection orders, the littering enforcement pilot. Currently, 73% of the tickets that have been issued are for littering offences, and the remainder are split between dog control PSPOs and the town centre PSPO. Officers have been working with district partners to ensure that all wards of the borough are visited frequently and at least monthly in areas of low littering or PSPO complaints. I'm pleased to report that following feedback and intelligence that has been gathered, they are now moving to monitor the sports fields and to keep them on their radar too. Members will be further updated on the progress of the pilot, as I have said at each presentation, through the scrutiny process. Whilst officers have focused their attention on keeping Dacorum COVID secure, we have fallen behind with our regular food and service inspections. Consequently, a food service recovery plan has been adopted, and we are playing catch up on our eatery inspections. I am pleased, however, to report to members that Rebecca Connolly's team have completed the first milestone of that food service recovery plan ahead of schedule, having visited all the high-risk premises before the June deadline in their original plan. Turning to community, as we move cautiously towards face-to-face contact, there are a number of face-to-face community events that are coming forward, not least the Queen's Platinum Jubilee and our Armed Forces Day celebrations. Please check out the Council website and social media platforms for further information. Additionally, the community teams have advised me that the ping pong parlour in the Marlows is now open. That opened on the 12th of May, and we are planning to have a more formal opening over the coming weeks. The Healthy Hub partnership and contract with Herts County Council Public Health has been extended for a further 2 years. We are back with face-to-face Healthy Hub drop-ins at the South Hill Centre, and we are planning more across the borough in the near future. Northwich Way Basketball Court, my sincere thanks to Councillor Elliott, Coach Ken and the young basketball players who first brought to my attention the poor state of the court at Northwich Way. I'm pleased to report that it is now refurbished and reopened to the public and is seeing between 30 and 40 young people there most evenings. Once the white lining has been done, and that's delayed because of cold weather, there will be an official launch and we hope to see the Mayor there. Community grants are now open again, and this round closes on the 31st of May. Mr Mayor and members, please promote this with your groups and your contacts. It's a very easy application to complete and a way of getting useful funds into our voluntary sector. Finally, Mr Mayor, Dacorum's award under the Household Support Fund is being administered by the Dacorum Community Trust as part of the nationwide effort to recover from the pandemic. Hertfordshire have provided us with some funding from the government's Household Support Fund, and this will be used to help people this winter with costs such as food and energy. We are working with a range of partners who will work with and contact those eligible for support directly to make sure that we get the right help to those that need it at the right time. Mr Mayor, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Councillor Banks. Councillor Burney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There's about 1,000 people lit up. I'm very pleased to hear about the government fund, hardship fund, that is to be administered by Dacorum Community Trust, which just happens to be, as Mayor-elect, for your information, my designated charity for next year. But this isn't an advert for that. I was wanting to ask the portfolio holder whether she could give us some information on how much is available under this fund and to those in need in Dacorum, and to let us know any details that she has as to how the fund will be administered. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, Councillor Burney, indeed, the Household Support Fund comes from central government, and Herts County Council decided to allocate an amount per district or borough for us to administer using our local knowledge. Dacorum Community Trust have received £44,000 to work with their client groups of the most vulnerable, and they will be looking at the circumstances around those that are in receipt of universal credit, those residents that present needing help with paying bills, purchasing food, and they'll be using the checks that they have in place to support this particularly group of residents that are facing extreme difficulty. They'll be working alongside the Citizens Advice Bureau, the food banks, and of course housing. They'll be administering on behalf of Decorn Borough Council. These groups will be working alongside Decorn Community Trust, signposting residents to this funding pot. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Banks. Councillor Freeman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question, unsurprisingly, on the PSPOs. Thanks for the information, which, again, you're focusing on the number of PSPOs issued. I was curious, now that we've been running for several months, whether or not you are in a position to provide information on the status of those ones that have been issued. I'm particularly interested in how many have been settled, how many have been rejected, what level they were rejected at, and how many are still outstanding. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, thank you, Councillor Freedman, for your question. Indeed, I do have a number of stats with me. I don't specifically have the breakdown as the volume. I only have it by each type of offence, so I'll happily provide a written response for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Banks. I just wondered if you were able to give us an update on whether the artificial grass pitch is going to be relocated in Berkhamsted, and if so, where?
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Simpson, with reference to Berkhamsted Leisure Centre, are you talking about? I'm so sorry. Yeah? Unfortunately, I don't have an update for you on that. I don't believe that's my portfolio, maybe? No, I didn't think it was my portfolio.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could the portfolio holder tell us what proportion of the fixed penalty notices issued for littering relate to cigarette waste, please?
Mr. Mayor, Councillor England, I have figures for March. Cigarette butts were 127. Cigarettes was 55. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Banks.
Is it point of order, Ron?
Councillor Hartman, please.
Thank you. Yeah, just a clarification, first of all, on the point to Councillor Freedman. I think some of the information may be in the last scrutiny report that we had to whichever committee it was that I'm on with that one. So you might get some information on there with it, but we look forward to the other information. The question I have for the portfolio holder is just a clarification question, is whether district enforcement have jurisdiction to prosecute for litter on private land. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Harden, no, they don't.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Does the portfolio holder agree that cigarette litter, cigarettes and cigarette ends is both a health hazard and a fire hazard? In my ward today, signs were going up on the bins at the Stonycroft shops, instructing smokers to put their cigarette butts in the built-in ashtrays in the bins. Does the portfolio holder agree that her department and environmental services need to work together to ensure there are more of these signs in the borough so that cigarette ends are put somewhere safe and not left littering the ground to create a health hazard and a fire hazard?
Mr Mayor, Councillor Guest, you make a very good point. I'd add to that my concerns about impact on wildlife and the water table. It is disgusting. They are full of chemicals that we do not need in our environment. And absolutely, I agree with you that there should be more signage to encourage people to use their common sense.
I wonder if you would be grateful if you would establish who is the portfolio holder and ask that portfolio holder to give Councillor Symington a bit of an answer.
Sorry, Councillor Williams, were you going to respond to that?
Only that I am the portfolio responsible for the Berkhamsted Sports Centre project. So I was the person to ask the question to, and I will get an answer to that question.
Thank you very much. Councillor England again, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If, as we learned from the answer to Councillor Symington's question of Councillor Barrett at last full council, if there is no data on the achievement of litter KPIs for some time, how will the litter enforcement pilot be capable of objective evaluation?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor England. The whole purpose of the pilot and the reason it has my wholehearted support is to establish these parameters, and I hope that will come forward through the scrutiny process to members. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
A very quick one still on PSPOs. I wondered if since the last council we've had more reports of criminals masquerading as environmental enforcement officers. I'm glad to say that I personally am not aware of them in the last month, but they were obviously a problem for a bit. And if we haven't, what reasons?
With
Quick answer, Councillor.
36 seconds to go and counting. No, we have not, to the best of my knowledge. And I think that was a spate of opportunistic criminality within our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Banks. That concludes our time on that particular portfolio. Can we now please move to Councillor Anderson, Planning and Infrastructure, please?
Good evening, Mayor. Members, since the last, since the last meeting, members have received briefings on the Habitat Resource Assessment and will be aware that all residential planning permissions are now suspended pending National Trust as the landowner putting in a mitigation strategy in place. Details on the issue are available on our website, and we hope that the mitigation strategy can be put in within 3 to 6 months. Digital pilots. This council has received government funding to pilot 3 key areas within the planning portfolio. One is starting this week with a new survey of residents in Apsley, which will run to the end of May to ask residents about the things they like about Apsley, what they don't like, and what they'd like to see changed as part of our Two Waters opportunity area. A second pilot is to do with the software that we're running to improve our administration of planning applications. And the third one, we are only one of 3 authorities in the country which received funding to pilot what's called geospatial software, which allows everyone to see, it's almost like artificial reality of what schemes would look like on a computer screen, which would be very interesting to see how those pilots develop. Under development management, the planning application for 1,400 homes at east of Tring at Marshcroft Farm has been received. It hasn't appeared on any lists yet because it will take some time to validate it take much larger planning applications do take longer to validate. I can't express a corporate opinion, as the council will have to determine the application with an open mind. But if I refer to the amount of open green belt involved, I'll leave it to members to work out my own personal view on it. There has, finally under development management, there's been a large increase in applications and workload, and we can't be far off back to how we were before the pandemic. And unfortunately, we still continue to experience problems with staff recruitment in enforcement. So again, I'd like to ask members to be patient when chasing up enforcement requests. Under the Hemel Gardens Communities Project, the initial framework plan has undergone an independent quality review, a panel of independent experts, and the team behind the project are digesting the comments received. The Local Journeys Transport Survey received 500 responses, and again, those responses are being crunched as I speak. And finally, under Hemel Gardens, it's appointed the first independent chair, Bob Lane, who's very experienced with regeneration projects, has taken on that role, which, because it involves two local authorities, it's quite good to have someone independent chairing it. Under Hemel Place, branding work on Hemel Hempstead has taken place, and Hemel Hempstead will be showcased at the annual UK Real Estate Investment and Infrastructure Forum, REIF for short, next month in Leeds. The council's partner behind this kind of work is also starting work with Berkhamsted and Tring, so please don't feel left out in other parts of the borough. This weekend is the last chance to follow the Owls Trail through the middle of Hemel Hempstead before they fly off on the 19th. So please, I think it's fabulous. Please take the time to do it if you haven't already. And next month, the council will be publishing a map with walking routes through which links all the important sites in the middle of Hemel Hempstead. South West Herts Joint Strategic Plan, the vision and contents of the Regulation 18 consultation has been agreed for the 6 authorities to consider in the next few months. I hope members will support it when it comes to scrutiny, etc., as the infrastructure in the future is vital. And the Joint Strategic Plan does not supersede the local plans, which will continue to control numbers. And the consultation for that Reg 18 is due to take place in the summer. And finally, under economic development, just to report the economic recovery plan continues to be delivered, as obviously the economic effects of the pandemic are by no means over. And I'm really quite proud of the effort and the partnership working the council has put into trying to get the recovery in our local borough. And I'm amazed I've got 20 seconds left, Mayor, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With regards to the HRA on the Chiltern Beechwood, while obviously the council's focus is on the effect of that, one thing I have been disappointed in is both by the council and the trust trying to find out ways which people like myself and members of the community who make regular use of those areas can contribute to management, whether that's spreading words or small projects like, for example, providing free dog bags in convenient spaces. Despite trying to get hold of people to know what I could do in assistance with that, I haven't had any success in getting any responses. So I was wondering whether or not the council can work with the landowner to try to begin on what members of the public can do to help.
Oh, cool. Blasted microphone. Yes, Mr. Mayor, the council is already in very advanced partnership working with the National Trust to resolve the problem and to help them come up with a mitigation strategy. I can, of course, ask whether there is anything that members of the public can do to help. However, at the end of the day, the problem we've got is the number of people using that site, and it's going to really come down to finding ways of less people using the site, because you just could not do it without finding without doing that. I don't, but I'm getting into very fine detail, and of course I can raise this in further discussions.
Sorry, thank you. I also wanted to refer back to the announcement obviously made recently about the suspension of planning in Dacorum. And I suppose just an observation, it seems to be very little known outside of our community. People seem to be remarkably unaware that our planning process is suspended. So I don't know what to make of that. But anyway, the question I wanted to ask actually refers to a radio interview that I was sent by a resident, given by Councillor Burney on the day of the announcement. And I wanted just to pick up some of the comments that he made in that interview and ask if you could reflect on them. I think one of them was that Councillor Burney felt that the council was likely to, or the government would be likely to reduce the target number of housing. He also commented that the developers would be bearing the cost, which is fair enough, but that it would not be added to council tax. Well, I can see that it isn't added to council tax, but basically if developers have to put aside land for SANGs, special areas of natural green, whatever, then there is a cost. And I think I've read elsewhere that developers will have to set aside 8 hectares per 1,000 houses. So there is a cost, and the cost will be in higher house prices. And for those who are being funded through universal credit, that cost does fall back on the taxpayer. So I think that's slightly misleading to say that there is no cost in terms of the development that's going to take place in Dacorum in future. And my last question, sorry, and this is a lot of questions which I'm probably not allowed to do, is I think I've noted that 20 hectares need to be set aside. I wondered if you could confirm that that's the correct number that we're looking for. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'm a bit of a difficulty because despite being promoted by the Deputy Mayor, I haven't actually heard the radio interview concerned. What I will say is that whilst the general public may not be aware of the HRA issue, which, I mean, as a press release, it ran for 7 pages. It's the most complicated press release I've read in my life by a country mile. Believe you me, the developers are. And they are well and truly aware of the HRA issue at the moment. In terms, getting back to Councillor Burney's radio interview, I think ultimately, long term, this is a piece of evidence that will allow this council to argue for a lower house building target. Whether we actually achieve it or not is another matter, but it is part of this administration strategy to try and achieve that. In terms of bearing the cost, yes, it's not going to cost the council taxpayer anything. It's the developer that bears the cost. But there are all sorts of other effects, particularly on land value, which will counteract that. So it's not necessarily a case of automatically putting up house prices. And in terms of the number of hectares that has to be put aside, out of any, I think it will vary according to the size of the development. So I don't think anyone can predetermine what that amount is. Certainly, it's something we'll be looking at going forward, but it's not something that's cast in stone in that fine detail right now. It's still too early doors for that. But I mean, it's certainly, whilst the National Trust as the landowner is looking at implementing the mitigation strategy, we as a council also, as part of the emerging local plan, will have to look at when we come forward with the local plan, what measures we require in terms of suitable alternative natural green space. So that work obviously started and is going to continue. So we will be requiring developers in the future to provide that natural green space.
I'm keen to let other ask questions because I know that other people want to. So thank you very much for those.
Thank you, Mayor. For the core strategy consultation, for the local plan, the habitat regulations assessment was initiated in 2008, well before the consultation. The impact of the development in special areas of conservation was already highlighted. Would the portfolio holder now accept that it was wrong for the council to resist the Lib Dems calls for a delay in the Regulation 18 until such reports were fully completed? And also, I just wanted to clarify a point that the portfolio holder seemed to make, which that he appeared to say that until the mitigation strategy was completed, all planning applications were frozen, but actually it's only new builds. So if you could just clarify that for me, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I deal with the questions in reverse order, it's residential permissions that have been suspended. So anything that involves new houses or conversion, anything that involves an increase in the population that are caught by the HRA, it does not cover things like commercial or extensions or anything of that kind. In terms of the first question, I'm glad the member asked it because it saves somebody else asking it. I think the question is based on a misapprehension, and I hope it's accidental and not deliberate, about what regulation consultations involve and what they're for. Regulation 18 consultations do not require things like habitat resource assessments to be made. You only have to get things like the HRA, the infrastructure delivery plan, and all those other things in place when you go to Regulation 19. Regulation 18, you do not require to do that. This council went to Regulation 18 when it did to get the feedback from the public that we received as part of our ammunition to argue Decorum's Corner and to argue for a lower housing provision. We didn't go through the Regulation 18 consultation with documents incomplete or missing to argue something that we were going to set in stone. That was never the point, that was never the case. What we did was we very specifically went to get the public opinion and we got it, and we're going to use it. We are grateful to the public because they have given us a very powerful tool to argue our local corner of the world and to prevent the damage that the full house building target would bring to us. So the answer to the first part of that question, Mr. Mayor, is that I think I've got no qualms about what the administration did. I think it's part of a strategy that we have. We're implementing or carrying out the assessments each stage through the process, and we're amassing the evidence that we need to make our case. Because let's be under no illusion, it will be extremely difficult to get our local plan approved if we didn't have the full allocation of housing, and we're going to have our work cut out to argue and get it approved with a lower level. And that's what we're doing. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. We've now run out of time for the portfolio holder. Can we now move on to agenda item 5, please, which is a motion which is going to be proposed by Councillor Julie Banks and seconded by Councillor Alan Anderson. Councillor Banks, would you like to present your motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Accepting and indeed thanking Councillor Freedman for his addition at point C, my motion reads, we are saddened and disturbed by the unprovoked aggression against Ukraine, which has caused horrific devastation and created an escalating humanitarian crisis with millions of women and children and the elderly displaced or affected, while those able men and women fight a war. In light of this, and as a way of expressing support for the people of Ukraine and the members of our communities who are from or who have ties with Ukraine, this council, A, condemns the unprovoked Russian invasion of Ukraine and stands in solidarity with the people of Ukraine and their families and friends, including those local to Decorum. B, will work with and support the efforts of our communities to provide help and comfort to those in need. And C, that the leader of the council to write to the Home Secretary urging the UK urging that the UK urgently, too many urgings and urgently there, the leader of the council to write to the Home Secretary urging that the UK urgently provides a faster route to safety for Ukrainians fleeing the Russian violence by waiving all visa requirements for Ukraine passport holders arriving in the UK while their country is under attack.
Thank you, Councillor Banks. Councillor Anderson?
If I can get a word in the microphone, seconded, Mr. Mayor, and reserve my right to speak at the end.
Thank you. You've all heard the motion. Does anybody have any comments? Or can we just take it as read that we are going to approve this? Agreed? Thank you very much. Agenda item 6, questions. There are none. Agenda item 7, business from the last council meeting. There's none. Agenda item 8, cabinet referrals. Now that was to consider the following cabinet referral. Thank you, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I turn members' attention to the agenda, page 34, Cabinet referral from the 15th of March 2020, item 7.1, CA 2422, garage strategy, with a resolve to recommend under item 1 and 2. Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Moving on to agenda item 9, overview and scrutiny annual reports. Councillor Marley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to give a summary of the reports that have been written by the chairs of the overview and scrutiny committees. The full versions are available on the council's website for anybody that wishes to read in more detail. Starting with the topic of finance and resources, the committee understandably faced the COVID challenges in the preceding year and were tasked with scrutinising the forecast deficits. Some of the sources of the pressures came from unexpected sources, in particular waste. The issue of waste services took considerable amount of time in that committee, and clarifications were understandably sought for the significant financial pressures created by the service. The pressures were explained as being created by a reduction in funding from Hertfordshire County Council, staffing costs, and loss of income from commercial waste, as well as increased domestic waste, as the changes in working trends caused by the pandemic reflected this. Increasing working from home meant that some of what would have been previously commercial waste became domestic waste, and this put pressure on several of the services and was reflected financially also. The committee went on to scrutinise the financial pressures on planning, neighbourhood delivery, the HRA slippage, and workings of the Economic Recovery Reserve medium-term financial strategy. Dacorum has always been a compassionate council, and this was reflected by some of the conversations that took place in this committee as well as others. One of the topics was that the committee queried council tax collections and the impact it was having on both the council and tenants, and sought confirmation that the measures for recovery taken during the pandemic were fair and appropriate. They were pleased to be informed that the council tax collection was only slightly down on target, and that officers had been diligent and proactive in ensuring that residents were made aware of all of the available support to them, including the government's £250 hardship fund that went some way in assisting with collection and providing some ease for residents. Whilst the officers were working incredibly hard to ensure and maintain the residents' health, the committee sought clarification about the provision of support for the staff well-being. And the committee queried matters relating to mental health issues and the support provided to staff during this period. They were pleased to learn that significant provisions had been made, including consultations with occupational health staff, and also that the European guidelines for screen working were being followed, and that the council was providing employer eye tests for staff that have extensive use, or staff whose roles require extensive use of screens. In July 2021, there was one agenda item, and that was about the COVID business grants and their distribution. The committee were pleased to learn that the 4 billion surplus that was being nationally reported as not being distributed didn't apply to Dacorum, and that all grants had been distributed to local businesses. There was also some questioning on the harder to reach employers that were not so easily identified on public registers. One group of these were the self-employed that were hard to trace. And being resourceful and proactive as the officers at this council are, they had recognised this following the first tranche and distribution of grants, and then thought ways to try and reach this group by using things like social media and websites to advertise this, and that saw a great improvement in the broadness of the distribution of these grants. It was then appropriate to question the accountability and the proper distribution of these grants, and officers explained that the latest grant distribution went through 4 tiers of approval. And whilst this was time-intensive for officers, it did emphasise the level of controls, checks and balances that were applied to the grant distribution. However, it's important to note that the underlying aim for everyone involved was to get the grants out to businesses in Dacorum as quickly as possible. It was important that the committee was satisfied that the budget and the funding were being dealt with proactively and not reactively. And the Assistant Director of Finance asked that his team's judgment was to be trusted, and in that explained the process, and that also external advisors, prevailing Treasury advice, as well as outcomes of consultation from Hertfordshire's Chief Finance Officers Group were all factors that led to the decisions that were presented to the committee, and hence fairly robust. The committee was satisfied that this was a proactive approach. One item to watch was the impact of the government's levelling up proposals for Dacorum. And whilst our geographical position being in the east of England should benefit us, our proximity to London could also be something that's slightly harmful to us, and this is something very much on the radar and reflects the proactivity in the formulation of budget assumptions and budget setting. Whilst there were several things that were put on hold because of the restrictions of the pandemic, that didn't stop it being a busy year for the Strategic Planning, Environment and Overview Scrutiny Committee. So much so that it was obliged to schedule several extra meetings, and a total of 11 meetings took place last year. To give an idea of the broad scope of this committee, some of the topics that were covered included water and sewage resources, Gaybridge Park development, local plan consultation results and progress, test and trace involvement, Dacorum's climate change response, fire safety policy, as well as the Luton Airport expansion. All of the topics above greatly impact the lives of the community here, and it's good to know that they remained in sharp focus. As usual, this was a busy year for the Housing and Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And in the spirit of unity, despite the urge to move back to normality, the council's private sector team worked closely with the homelessness prevention team and prevented a number of illegal evictions taking place. And this ensured that families in Dacorum still received the support as they transitioned to post-pandemic living. The team also continued to licence houses of multiple occupancy, and the number of licensed properties increased by 20% the year to June 2021 and continues to increase as the benefits of partnering with the council are being recognised. One of the standout features of Decorum is its dialogue with tenants. And this year that was highlighted by the housing allocations policy that was scrutinised by the Tenants and Leaseholders Committee prior to being presented to the Housing OSC. There were a number of amendments that came, and it was great to know that what was being presented to us had first been scrutinised by service users and from a position of their experience in being in their experience of the housing allocations policies, and this ensures that the policy is the fairest that it can be. The borough stayed committed to maintaining its physical activity, well-being, arts and culture offer. Despite the sporadic nature of the restrictions, we still were able to give a full offer. Some of the highlights were the Tring Book Club, the author webinars, the virtual wellness festival, which was a week-long health and wellbeing event, which had a reach of 16,500 people with several positive testimonials from individuals and residents. The Colourful Minds course took place with residents completing the course and participating in the wellbeing evaluation. The gross mental health social value of this was calculated at £9,500, and the feedback from one of the attendees exemplified by this comment that everybody should have this instead of being offered antidepressants. The committee had previously referred the physical activity strategy, and we were pleased to see the revised plan return with 28 new activities that were more geographically inclusive across the borough. The additional activities address the gaps and demand that had previously been identified by the committee and benefited the entire borough. Some of these activities included the refurbishment of the basketball court in Northridge Way, the Shape Up Weight Management Programme, Your Town 2021 5K Run, and pledges for the refurbishment of Berkhamsted and Hemel Hempstead Hockey Club. Additionally, consultation started on the redevelopment of Berkhamsted Leisure Club and Leisure Centre, not a club. 37 local and national sports organisations were included in the consultation process, and the concept design proposals and the RIBA Stage 2 cost plan were presented to the committee. The committee looks forward to receiving the Stage 2 briefing when it is ready, and the project has an estimated completion date of May 2025. The capital programme was rephased and expenditure moved from the 2020-21 year to the 21-22 year. Temporarily disrupted by the pandemic, but still remained in sharp focus for the council. And Decorum has always championed the building of social housing and were one of the first to do so in 2016 when financial restrictions on building were eased. It was reassuring to see that the events of 2020 didn't change this commitment and that building works resumed as quickly as possible. 2021 saw the opening of a number of newly built housing developments across Decorum, and this included the Martindale housing development, which was a mixture of private and social housing and an innovative way to ensure the funding that's required for social housing. Additionally, the corporate planning process was undertaken to develop priorities and identify opportunities for the council for the next 3 years. The resulting budget proposals were brought to the scrutiny committees. A number of consistent themes across the council were identified as climate change action, improving customer focus, improved process and digitalisation, and the development of a digital strategy, developing positive leadership and culture, and the need for a new people strategy, community safety, economic recovery, and a refreshed focus on the council's place shaping programme. Additionally, a specific and detailed service review was undertaken by the Housing Service. During the review, an action plan was developed, which the Housing Service Management Team has used to prioritise the development activities. One of the key activities includes making use of the 100% stock condition survey as a means to advise and refine the HRA asset management plan, regrading improvements, component replacements, and to advise on the fabric first requirements of the stock as a key element of meeting the target to be net carbon zero by 2050. Often in our busyness, we don't always pause to celebrate the work that is done by this council, although it is recognised that the staff in the housing service are a very hard-working and innovative team. It was a delight to be given a reason to pause when we learnt that the Cornmill Court housing development in Dacorum had received an award from the Hertfordshire Association of Architects for the conservation work carried out on the properties frontlining the High Street. This is the second award that the scheme has received, and it's important to note that it's done so by winning these awards above those of schemes of larger organisations and higher resourced national companies. This is just one of the awards that the council has won for new developments in recent years, which illustrates the housing team's commitment and resolve to providing the best quality housing possible to those in need, even with the pressures of a pandemic. The Assistant Director of Housing, Natasha Beresford, won Inspirational Colleague of the Year at the Housing Heroes Awards. The committee were not surprised by this win, as it's long recognised the exceptional work done by the housing team, with Natasha Beresford often being a person whose work stand out. It was a delight that this was recognised on a larger scale. As spokesperson for this evening, I speak on behalf of the committee chairs, and we thank our vice chairs and also our committee members to the work they do in studying the reports and scrutinising for the benefit of the community. We also thank and recognise the hard work of the officers and the quality of the reports that come to us. And last but not least, member services for the support they give to the committees and members and the way they efficiently and effectively collate the reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Imani, for your very comprehensive report. It's much appreciated. Can we now move on to agenda item 10? And this is a waiver of 6-month council attendance rule under section 85 of the Local Government Act 1972. The council is asked to approve Councillor Barry Mears' non-attendance at meetings of the authority due to maternity for a 6-month period up to the 30th of November 2022, pursuant to section 85(1) of the Local Government Act 1972. Is everybody in agreement with that? I beg your pardon. Councillor Tyndall, sorry.
If I can just clarify, thank you, colleagues. You'll be pleased to hear that Councillor Barry
Thank you, Councillor Tyndall. Perhaps you could convey our good wishes to her. Thank you. Agenda item 11, changes to committee membership. Councillor Tyndall. None? Thank you. Agenda item 12, changes to committee dates. There's just a cabinet on the 28th, I believe, Councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to advise Council, the cabinet schedule for the 28th of June 2022 is being cancelled. There is another cabinet 2 weeks later on the 12th of July, which the business will be transferred to. The reason for cancellation is that the Leader of the Opposition, the Chief Executive, the Deputy Leader and the Leader of the Council will be at the LGA conference, and therefore the cabinet will be a little bit light.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Now that...
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry.
If you beg my indulgence, going back to item 11, I understood from my conversation with Councillor Tyndall that he was going to make a new nomination to the Children's Conservation Board under this item.
I thought that would be automatic. Yes, thank you for prompting me. I would like to nominate Councillor Sally Symington to be the decorum representative on the Children's Conservation Board, or whatever board it is.
Thank you, Councillor Tyndall. I think that rounds off the agenda for this evening. Is it agreed? Thank you. As that is the last agenda item, I declare the meeting closed.